While I was cleaning, I saw my daughter secretly hide something under the bed. I pretended not to notice. 5 minutes after she left, I knelt down and reached underneath to see what it was. A yellow folder, thick, carefully concealed. I opened it, and what I saw inside made my blood run cold. My heart nearly stopped. I'm truly grateful you're here. Before we continue, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I love seeing how far this community reaches. Please note some elements of this story have been dramatized for storytelling and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real people or places is coincidental, but the message behind it is meaningful. The afternoon sun filtered through the lace curtains as I carried a basket of linens down the hallway. It was Friday, March 1st, just after 2 o'clock. The house was quiet except for the soft creak of floorboards. I was heading to the guest room where my daughter Amanda and her husband James had been staying since they moved in 2 months ago after Richard's funeral. As I approached the doorway, I heard movement inside. Through the partially open door, I saw Amanda kneeling beside the bed. She glanced over her shoulder nervously, then reached under the frame and carefully slid something beneath it, a thick yellow folder. She adjusted it, pushing it into the shadows, then stood and brushed off her knees. My heart quickened. I stepped back and pretended to fold a towel from the basket, my face neutral. Amanda walked out. She didn't look at me. "Just tidying up," she said quietly, then disappeared upstairs. I waited. 5 minutes passed. The house settled into silence. Then I walked into the guest room and closed the door. I knelt beside the bed and reached under the frame. My fingers found the folder. I pulled it out. A manila folder, heavy, no label. I opened it. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, all of me. There I was at Waterfront Park, sitting on a bench, staring into the distance. Another showed me at the grocery store, my hand hovering over a shelf. Another at Trad Street, looking confused. They had been taken from odd angles without my knowledge. In every photograph, I looked disoriented. My hands trembled. Beneath the photographs were documents. I pulled the first one free. Patient Elizabeth Whitmore, date of birth, April 14, 1962. Diagnosis, early-stage Alzheimer's disease with moderate cognitive decline. The report was signed by Dr. Alan Morrison, a name I didn't recognize. It detailed memory lapses, confusion, impaired judgment. But I had never seen Dr. Morrison. I had never been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. This was a lie. The next document was a psychological evaluation describing me as emotionally unstable, prone to paranoia. Another lie. My pulse roared. The next document made my blood run cold. A conservatorship petition, filed with Charleston County Court, requesting that Amanda Whitmore Sterling be appointed as my legal guardian due to my incapacity to manage personal and financial affairs. At the bottom was my daughter's signature. Beneath the legal documents was a printed email. Subject R.E. Property Sale, 22 Trad Street. A conversation between James Sterling and a real estate agent. The email discussed my home's estimated value, $2.1 million, and the timeline for listing it once the legal arrangements were finalized. My home, the house Richard and I had bought 30 years ago, where we raised Amanda. They were planning to sell it. They were planning to take everything, and my daughter was helping them. I sat on the floor, the folder in my lap, my hands shaking. I didn't know how long I sat there. The sun shifted and the shadows lengthened. Finally, I gathered the documents, placed them back in order, and slid the folder under the bed exactly where Amanda had left it. I stood and walked out, closing the door softly. My heart was pounding, my hands were trembling, but my mind was clear. I had spent 30 years as a prosecutor in the Charleston County District Attorney's Office. I knew how to build a case. I knew how to gather evidence. And I knew with absolute certainty that I was not going to let this happen. Not without a fight. I sank to the floor, my legs folding beneath me as if they'd lost the will to hold me upright. The paper, the medical record with my name printed across the top, was still clutched in my hand, and I forced myself to read it again. Surely I had misunderstood. Surely this was some kind of mistake. But no, there it was, patient Elizabeth Whitmore. Date of evaluation, February 15th, 2024. Evaluating physician Dr. Alan Morrison, MD Psychiatry. February 15th. Less than 2 weeks ago, a day I remembered well because I had spent it volunteering at the Charleston County Library. I had not been to see any doctor. I had certainly not been evaluated by a psychiatrist. The report was filled with clinical language meant to sound objective and professional. Patient presence with memory lapses, difficulty recalling recent events and episodes of confusion. Observed paranoid tendencies when questioned, demonstrates poor judgment in financial matters. Recommendation, further evaluation for early-stage Alzheimer's disease. Consider legal measures to ensure patient safety and asset protection. Every word was a lie. I set the medical record aside and reached back into the folder. My fingers closed around another document, a psychological evaluation dated 5 days later, signed by a licensed clinical psychologist. The conclusion was unmistakable. Mrs. Whitmore exhibits signs of cognitive impairment and diminished capacity for independent decision-making. Recommend supervised care and legal guardianship. I had never met this psychologist. I had never sat in an office answering questions about my mental state. This, too, was fabricated. Beneath the evaluation was a legal document, and the moment I saw the header, my stomach turned. Petition for conservatorship of the person and estate of Elizabeth Whitmore. I knew what a conservatorship was. I had prosecuted cases involving elder abuse and unlawful guardianship. I knew that once granted, the person under conservatorship lost nearly every legal right, the right to manage their own money, to make medical decisions, to live where they chose. It was a cage, and the petitioner, the person asking the court to take away my rights, was listed at the bottom of the first page. Amanda Whitmore Sterling, daughter. For a moment I couldn't breathe. My daughter, the child I had raised, the woman I had put through medical school, the person I trusted most in the world. She had signed her name to this petition. I flipped to the next page. Her statement to the court read, "I am deeply concerned for my mother's well-being. She has become increasingly forgetful and disoriented. I fear she is a danger to herself. I am requesting conservatorship to ensure her safety and the preservation of her estate." Tears blurred my vision and I wiped them away. This wasn't sadness. This was betrayal. The final document was an email printed on plain paper dated 3 days ago. It was a correspondence between Amanda and a local real estate agent discussing the sale of my home. My Victorian house, the one Richard and I had bought 34 years ago, was valued at $2.1 million, according to the agent's estimate. The agent's message was brief. Once the conservatorship is finalized, we can move forward with the listing. Given the current Charleston market, I anticipate a sale within 60 days. Amanda's reply was even shorter. "Thank you, let's proceed as soon as possible." I sat there on the floor, surrounded by lies and legal documents and photographs I had never consented to, and I felt something inside me harden. This wasn't just about money. This was about erasing me. This was about taking everything I had, my home, my autonomy, my identity, and handing it over to someone else, to my own daughter. The sound of a car door slamming outside pulled me from my thoughts. I looked up and turned toward the window. Through the lace curtains, I could see Amanda's car in the driveway. She and James were stepping out, his arm draped over her shoulder in a way that felt possessive. Then Amanda looked up. Her eyes met mine through the window across the yard and all the years of trust I thought we shared. Her expression was unreadable. Guilt, fear, something else. James said something, and she looked away, following him toward the front door. I heard the jingle of keys, the creak of the door opening. They were home. Sleep was impossible. I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling as the hours crawled past. The house had gone quiet after dinner. Amanda had excused herself early, claiming exhaustion from her shift at the hospital, and James had retreated to the guest room with her. I had smiled, nodded, played the part of the gracious mother-in-law, but inside my mind was spinning. The folder was hidden now, tucked into the locked drawer of my desk, where I kept my most important papers. The photographs, the fake medical records, the conservatorship petition, all of it was safe. But the knowledge of what I had found sat heavy in my chest, making every breath feel labored. At 11:47 p.m., I was still awake, lying on my side and watching the thin sliver of light that seeped under my bedroom door from the hallway. The old Victorian house settled around me, its familiar creaks and groans, a strange comfort. and then I heard voices muffled and low coming from somewhere downstairs. I sat up slowly, my heart already beginning to quicken. The voices were coming from the guest room, the room where Amanda used to sleep as a girl, the room where she and James were staying now. I should have stayed in bed. I should have pulled the covers over my head and pretended I hadn't heard anything, but I couldn't. I slipped out of bed, my bare feet silent against the hardwood floor. The hallway was dim lit, only by the small nightlight near the bathroom. I moved carefully, avoiding the spots where I knew the boards would creak, and made my way toward the guest room door. The voices grew clearer as I approached. James was speaking, his tone low and cold in a way that made my skin prickle. I pressed my ear to the door. 2 weeks, Amanda. The appointment is already set for Monday, March 11th. You just need to keep her calm until then. Once the evaluation is done, we file the emergency conservatorship and it's over. There was a pause, and then Amanda's voice, small, trembling, nothing like the confident doctor I knew her to be. I don't know if I can keep lying to her face, James. She's my mother. We've been over this 100 times. James's voice was sharp, now impatient. The debts won't wait. Do you want to lose everything, your career, the house, everything we've worked for? But she doesn't deserve. She's 62 years old and living alone in a house worth over $2 million. James cut her off, his words clipped and deliberate. She doesn't need all that space. She doesn't need that money sitting in accounts she barely touches. We do, and if you don't have the stomach for this, Amanda, then maybe I'll handle it myself. No. Amanda's voice cracked. No, I'll do it. Just please don't. Then stop second-guessing me. Silence fell thick and suffocating. I stood frozen in the hallway, my hand pressed against the doorframe to steady myself. Amanda wasn't a willing participant. She was being pressured, manipulated, maybe even threatened. And James was the architect of all of this. I pulled away from the door as quietly as I could, my pulse hammering in my ears. I needed to get back to my room. I needed to think. A floorboard creaked beneath my foot. I froze. Inside the guest room, the voices stopped. I didn't wait to hear more. I turned and hurried back down the hallway, my bare feet moving as quickly as I dared. I slipped into my bedroom, eased the door shut, and climbed back into bed, pulling the covers up to my chin. My breath came fast and shallow, and I forced myself to slow it, to lie still, to appear as though I had been asleep all along. Footsteps sounded in the hallway, heavy, deliberate. They stopped just outside my door. I held my breath, my eyes fixed on the thin strip of light beneath the door. A shadow passed across it, James's shadow, tall and unmoving. I could feel him standing there, listening, deciding. Seconds stretched into what felt like hours. And then finally the footsteps moved away, fading back down the hallway toward the guest room. I exhaled slowly, my entire body trembling. He hadn't opened the door. He hadn't confronted me. But I knew he was suspicious. The morning light was pale when I made my way downstairs. It was Saturday, March 2nd, just after 8 o'clock, and the house smelled of coffee and toast. For one fleeting moment, I let myself imagine that everything was normal. But the moment I stepped into the kitchen, that illusion shattered. James was already there, standing at the counter in a crisp, white dress shirt, pouring coffee. He looked up as I entered and smiled, warm and easy, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Good morning, Elizabeth," he said brightly. "I hope you slept well. I made coffee. Would you like some?" I forced a polite smile. "That would be lovely, thank you." He handed me a mug, and I took it to the small breakfast table where Amanda was already seated, her hands wrapped around her own cup, her eyes fixed on her plate. She didn't look up when I sat down. "How are you feeling this morning, sweetheart?" I asked gently. She glanced up for just a second, her expression tight. "Fine, Mom, just tired." James joined us at the table, setting down a plate of scrambled eggs with the easy confidence of a man who had nothing to hide. He took a sip of his coffee before turning his attention to me. "Elizabeth," he began casually, "I was wondering, did you have a nice time at your book club meeting yesterday? Helen called last night asking where you were." My hand tightened around my coffee mug. I knew exactly what he was doing. There had been no book club meeting yesterday. This was a test designed to plant doubt. I'd spent 25 years in courtrooms facing down attorneys who tried to rattle me. I knew how to keep my face calm. "Oh," I said lightly, letting a small frown crease my forehead. "I thought the meeting was next week. I must have gotten the dates mixed up. I'll call Helen." James's smile widened, but his eyes stayed cold. No harm done. We all forget things sometimes, don't we? The implication hung in the air. You're forgetting things. You're getting older. I took a sip of coffee and said nothing. James leaned forward slightly. Actually, that reminds me there are a few documents Amanda and I think we should review together soon. Just routine things. Power of attorney forms, medical directives. It's smart to have everything in order. My stomach turned, but I kept my expression neutral. Power of attorney, medical directives. The very documents I'd seen in that folder. Of course, I said smoothly. That sounds sensible. James's smile didn't waver, but I saw satisfaction flicker in his eyes. He thought I was falling for it. Wonderful. I'm glad you're being so reasonable about this. These conversations can be uncomfortable, but it's important to plan ahead. Amanda shifted in her seat, her hands twisting around her mug. The guilt radiating from her was almost palpable. She suddenly pushed her chair back, the legs scraping against the tile. I need to get ready for my shift, she said quickly. I'm covering for someone today. She stood, grabbed her plate, and hurried out without meeting anyone's eyes. Her footsteps were quick on the stairs. James watched her go, his expression unreadable. Then he turned back to me, that same smile in place. She works so hard, he said. I worry about her sometimes. I nodded, wrapping both hands around my mug to keep them from shaking. She's always been dedicated. James stood, picking up his plate. Well, I'll let you enjoy your morning. Let me know if you need anything. He walked out, leaving me sitting alone. I stared down at my coffee, my mind racing. James was testing me, probing for weaknesses, planting seeds of doubt. And Amanda was drowning, caught in a current she couldn't escape. I had thought I only needed to save myself. Now I understood the truth. I would have to save us both. The afternoon was quiet. I had retreated to the living room after lunch, settling into the armchair by the window with a book I'd been trying to read for days. The words blurred on the page, but I kept my eyes trained on the text anyway. I heard James's footsteps before I saw him. He entered the living room with easy confidence, his hands in his pockets, his expression thoughtful. Elizabeth, he said gently, do you have a moment? I looked up, marking my place with a finger. Of course. He sat down on the couch beside my chair, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, the posture of someone preparing for a serious conversation. Amanda and I have been worried about you, he began softly. You've seemed a little forgetful lately. Not anything major, but enough that we've noticed. I kept my face neutral, but my pulse quickened. Another test, another attempt to undermine me. Forgetful, I said mildly. In what way? James gave me a sympathetic smile. Well, there was the book club meeting yesterday. You forgot about it entirely. And Amanda mentioned you forgot to take your blood pressure medication a few days ago. She found the pills still on the counter that evening. That was a lie. I took my medication every morning without fail. I had never forgotten. And then there was the incident with the car keys. James continued. You left them in the refrigerator last week. Amanda found them when she was putting away groceries. Another lie. I kept my keys on a hook by the front door, the same place for 30 years. I don't recall any of that, I said carefully. That's exactly what concerns us. James said, his expression pained. You don't remember. That's why Amanda and I think you should see a doctor. Just a routine checkup, nothing invasive. Someone who can assess whether there's anything to be concerned about. He paused. Dr. Morrison is a family friend. He's a psychiatrist who specializes in working with older adults. I think you'd feel comfortable with him. Dr. Morrison. The name hit me like a punch. Dr. Alan Morrison. The same name on the fabricated medical record in that folder. The Dr. James had already lined up to rubber stamp whatever story he wanted told. I forced myself to take a slow breath. I appreciate your concern, James, but I had my annual checkup just 2 months ago with Dr. Patel. She ran a full panel of tests, including cognitive screening. Everything came back perfectly normal. For just a fraction of a second, James's smile faltered. His eyes went cold, flat, and hard. Then the warmth returned. Of course, I'm glad to hear that, but if you ever want a second opinion, just let me know. Dr. Morrison's door is always open. I'll keep that in mind, I said evenly. James stood, giving my shoulder a brief pat. Good. I just want you to know we're here for you, Elizabeth. We care about you. He left the room and I sat frozen in my chair. The moment I heard his footsteps fade upstairs, I pulled out my phone. My hands trembled as I typed Dr. Alan Morrison, psychiatrist, Charleston, South Carolina. The search results loaded quickly. Dr. Morrison had a practice downtown, a professional website, credentials listed. But there was something else. I clicked on the third result, a link to the South Carolina Board of Medical Examiners. Doctor. Morrison's name appeared in a list of physicians subject to disciplinary action, formal reprimand issued for ethical violations related to patient evaluations and documentation practices. Case settled, physician remains licensed under supervision. Ethical violations, documentation practices. This man had been caught falsifying records before, and James wanted me to see him. I set my phone down, my mind racing. The plan had been in place for weeks, maybe months. The fake medical records, the photographs, the conservatorship petition, the corrupt doctor ready to provide the final piece of false evidence. 2 weeks. That's what James had said. The appointment was set for Monday, March 11th. If I didn't act before then, I would lose everything. This time I would not wait. This time I would fight back. Sunday afternoon brought a kind of normalcy I desperately needed. The Garden Club tea was a monthly tradition I'd attended for 15 years, held at Helen's house, this time a charming colonial with blooming camellias lining the walkway. I had baked a lemon pound cake that morning and carried it carefully up the front steps. For a few moments, I let myself believe everything might still be all right. Helen opened the door with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Elizabeth, I'm so glad you could make it." I stepped inside, holding out the cake. "I brought your favorite." "How lovely. Thank you." She took the dish but didn't meet my gaze. "Everyone's in the sunroom." I walked toward the back of the house where the other women were gathered around a low table with teacups and small plates. I recognized every face: Margaret, Susan, Linda, Caroline, Joyce. Women I'd known for years. But when I entered, the conversation stopped. It was subtle. A pause that lasted a beat too long. Eyes that flickered toward me and then away. Smiles that felt strained. "Hello, everyone," I said warmly. Murmured greetings followed, but no one stood to hug me. No one patted the empty chair beside them. I took a seat on the far end, and the conversation slowly resumed. Spring plantings, a charity fundraiser, someone's engagement. But I could feel the weight of something unspoken. Helen returned with tea, pouring me a cup with careful attention. "How are you feeling, Elizabeth?" The question landed oddly. Not how are you, but how are you feeling? "I'm well, thank you," I said evenly. "Good, that's good." She nodded too many times. Linda leaned forward. "Helen told us you haven't been feeling quite yourself lately. We've all been so worried about you." I set my teacup down carefully. "I'm not sure what you mean. I feel perfectly fine." Linda glanced at Helen. "Well, Helen mentioned you've been having some trouble with memory. Your son-in-law called her last week. James called you." I kept my voice calm. Helen's face flushed. "Yes, a few days ago. He said he was concerned about you. He mentioned you'd been forgetting things, appointments, conversations. He asked if we could keep an eye on you." The room went silent. Every pair of eyes was on me. I understood exactly what James had done. He had reached into my social circle, planting seeds of doubt among people I trusted. He had painted me as a woman in decline, someone whose words couldn't be trusted. And they had believed him. I forced a small smile. "I assure you I'm perfectly fine. I had a full checkup 2 months ago and everything came back normal. But I appreciate your concern." The women exchanged glances. I could see the uncertainty. Was she telling the truth, or was this what someone with memory problems would say? I finished my tea, made polite conversation for 20 minutes, then excused myself. No one tried to stop me. When I reached my car, I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, staring at my hands. They were trembling. I clenched them into fists and took a slow breath. James had taken more than my dignity. He had taken my community. The people I had shared my life with for years now looked at me with pity and doubt. I pulled out my phone and scrolled until I found the name Thomas Bradford. Thomas was a lawyer, a senior partner at one of Charleston's oldest firms. He and Richard had been close friends for decades. If anyone would believe me without question, it was Thomas. I pressed the call button. This time I would not fight alone. Monday morning arrived gray and cool. I left the house at 8:30 telling Amanda I had an appointment downtown. She barely looked up from her coffee. The cafe was 20 minutes away, tucked into a strip mall where no one would recognize me. I chose a corner table and ordered coffee I didn't drink. Robert Williams arrived 10 minutes later. He was younger than I'd expected, early 30s, with dark hair and a sharp, intelligent gaze. He carried a leather messenger bag and wore a navy suit. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Robert Williams from Thomas Bradford's firm. Thomas briefed me on your situation." I shook his hand. "Thank you for meeting me." He pulled out a legal pad. "I need to hear everything. Start from the beginning." So I told him. The hidden folder, the fake medical records, the photographs, the conservatorship petition signed by Amanda, the corrupt doctor, the way James had contacted my friends planning doubts about my mental state. Robert listened without interruption, his pen moving steadily. When I finished, he set the pen down. "This is elder abuse," he said quietly. "Financial exploitation, fraud, conspiracy. But right now, all we have are documents that could be explained away. We need concrete evidence. Video or audio of James discussing his plans. Something undeniable." "How do we get that?" I asked. Robert reached into his bag and pulled out a small box. Inside were 4 tiny devices, each no larger than a button. "Hidden cameras," he said. "Battery life of 72 hours. Wi-Fi enabled. They stream live to a secure cloud account only you and I can access. Plant them in common areas, living room, dining room, hallways." I picked up one of the cameras, turning it over. It was so small. "This is legal?" I asked. "In your own home, yes. South Carolina is a one-party consent state. You're present in the home. It's perfectly legal." I closed the box. "Then let's do it." By noon, I was back home. The house was empty, James at the hospital, Amanda at the clinic. I moved quickly, my heart pounding. The first camera went inside a decorative brass clock on the mantel above the living room fireplace angled toward the sofa. The second I tucked into a picture frame in the dining room aimed at the table. The third fit into a wooden bookend on the shelf near the armchair, James's favorite spot. The fourth I mounted inside a hallway picture frame just outside the living room door. When I finished, I pulled out my phone and opened the app Robert had installed. 4 small screens appeared, each showing a live feed. The image quality was sharp, the audio clear. I was ready. That evening, James came home just after 6. I was in the kitchen when I heard the front door open and his footsteps cross into the living room. I held my breath. There was a pause, a silence that stretched too long, then his voice calm and curious. "New decoration, Elizabeth." I walked into the living room, drying my hands on a towel. James was standing in front of the fireplace, his eyes fixed on the brass clock. "I found it at an estate sale last week," I said evenly. "Lovely, isn't it?" He smiled, but his gaze lingered on the clock. "Very nice." Amanda appeared behind him, glancing at the clock and then at me. "It suits the room, Mom." "I thought so too," I said. James turned away, but not before I caught the faint crease between his brows, the smallest flicker of suspicion. He didn't say anything more, but I knew he was watching, and now so was I. Tuesday evening settled over the house like a held breath. I was in my bedroom, door closed and locked phone propped on the nightstand. Bluetooth earbuds rested in my ears, connected to the surveillance app. 4 small video feeds filled the screen living room, dining room, hallway, silent and still. I had been watching for nearly an hour when at 9:15 p.m. my phone vibrated. Motion detected living room camera. I tapped the notification. The living room feed expanded. James had come downstairs, settling onto the sofa with his phone pressed to his ear. I held my breath and turned up the volume. His voice came through clearly low but unmistakable. "Yes, the evaluation is confirmed for Monday, March 11th, 10 a.m. I grabbed a pen and notebook, my hand shaking as I scribbled the words. "Dr. Morrison knows what to write. We've been over the script multiple times." My stomach turned. "We've been over the script." He had rehearsed this with the doctor. "Once we have the signed court order." James continued calm and businesslike. "I can move her to the memory care facility by Wednesday the 13th. It's already arranged." I pressed record on the app, the small red dot appearing in the corner. Evidence. The house goes on the market immediately after that. My contact says we'll have offers within a week. Cash within 30 days given the Charleston market. 30 days. 1 month and everything Richard and I had built would be gone. And Amanda. The voice on the other end was muffled, but I heard the question. James leaned back. Amanda's cooperating. She's scared, but she won't back out now. She knows what's at stake. The call ended. James stood and walked upstairs. I stopped the recording and immediately saved it first to my phone, then my laptop, then the cloud account Robert had set up. 3 copies. Safe. 15 minutes later, the dining room camera showed movement. Amanda and James sat across from each other at the table with mugs of tea. I adjusted the volume. James's voice was softer now, almost gentle. Your mother seems calm lately. That's good. Just keep things steady for 6 more days. After Monday, it'll all be over. Amanda nodded, her face turned slightly away from the camera, but I could see it the way her shoulders trembled, the way she lifted one hand to wipe at her cheek. She was crying. I know this is hard for you, James said, his tone patient. But it's the right thing. She needs professional care. You're doing this out of love. Amanda's voice was barely audible. I know, but the tears kept falling. I watched until they left the room, then turned off the screen. My bedroom was dark except for the pale glow of the streetlight outside. I sat very still, phone clutched in both hands. I had the evidence now. James's own words recorded in clear audio and video. His conspiracy laid bare the fake evaluation, the corrupt doctor, the timeline, the house sale, Amanda's coercion. Everything. But I needed more than evidence. I needed a legal shield, something that would protect me even if James moved faster than I anticipated. And then I remembered. Years ago, before Richard passed, he had mentioned something in passing. A sealed envelope kept in Thomas Bradford's office. Instructions only to be opened if I was ever threatened, ever in danger. At the time, I had smiled and brushed it off. Richard had always been cautious, always thinking ahead. But now I understood. Tomorrow I would call Thomas. I would ask about that envelope, and I would find out what Richard had left for me. Thursday morning brought a crisp blue sky and a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in days. I drove downtown to Bradford and Associates, a 3-story brick building on Broad Street that housed one of Charleston's oldest and most respected law firms. The receptionist showed me to Thomas Bradford's office on the 2nd floor. He was waiting for me standing as I entered, a tall man in his mid-70s with white hair and a kind face that softened when he smiled, though his eyes remained sharp and assessing. Elizabeth, he said, extending his hand. Thank you for coming. I shook his hand and he gestured to one of the leather chairs across from his mahogany desk. The office smelled of old books and lemon-polished walls lined with legal volumes. Thomas settled into his chair and folded his hands on the desk. I've been expecting this call for 2 years, Elizabeth. Richard made me promise to give you this only when you were ready. He opened a drawer and pulled out a thick manila envelope sealed with red wax. My breath caught. Richard's handwriting covered the front in bold, familiar strokes. For my beloved Elizabeth to be opened only if she is ever threatened or coerced. Thomas slid the envelope across the desk. He loved you very much. He wanted to make sure you'd always be protected. My hands trembled as I broke the seal and pulled out the contents. 3 documents carefully organized. The first was a legal will dated 6 months before Richard's passing. I scanned the opening paragraph. This second will hereby revokes any powers of attorney or legal instruments executed by Elizabeth Whitmore under duress, coercion, or diminished capacity. In the event that Elizabeth shows signs of losing her autonomy or is subject to undue influence, Thomas Bradford is named emergency executor with full authority to protect her person and estate. I looked up at Thomas. A second will? He nodded. Ironclad. If James tries to use a fraudulent power of attorney or conservatorship, this invalidates it immediately, and it gives me legal standing to intervene on your behalf. The second document was a letter 3 pages in Richard's handwriting. My eyes blurred as I began to read. My dearest Elizabeth, if you're reading this, it means something has gone terribly wrong and I'm not there to protect you. I'm so sorry. 6 months ago, I noticed James researching elder guardianship laws on his laptop. At first, I thought nothing of it. He's a doctor after all. But something felt off. The way he looked at you sometimes, the questions he asked about our finances, our house. so I hired a private investigator. What he found horrified me. James is not who he seems. He has done this before Elizabeth twice, and I will not let him do it to you. I didn't tell you while I was alive because I didn't want to burden you with fear. I hoped he would simply move on, leave our family. But if you're holding this letter, it means he didn't. It means he's still trying. Fight him, my love. You are stronger and smarter than he will ever be, and you are not alone. Thomas will help you. Trust him. I love you always. Richard. Tears slipped down my cheeks. I wiped them away and picked up the third document, a 12-page private investigator's report. The first section detailed Patricia Sterling, married to James in 2012 when he was 24, a medical resident with nothing to his name. Patricia was 48, a recent widow who had inherited $800,000 from her late husband. 2 years later, Patricia was gone, a fatal fall down the stairs in her own home. The death was ruled an accident. James inherited everything. The second section was about Karen Sterling, married to James in 2017 when he was 29 and establishing his surgical practice. Karen was 52, owned a successful bakery, and had assets worth $600,000. Within a year, Karen was declared mentally incompetent. James was appointed her legal guardian. In 2019, Karen took her own life in a psychiatric hospital. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the pages. 2 women, both older, both with money, both gone. And now James had set his sights on me. Elizabeth. Thomas's voice was gentle. He came around the desk and placed a hand on my shoulder. We will stop him, and this time he won't walk away. I looked up at him, wiping my face. My voice came out steady, harder than I expected. Let's make sure of that. Friday evening, I arrived home with my briefcase full of documents, the second will, Richard's letter, the investigator's report. The moment I opened the front door, I knew something was wrong. James and Amanda were waiting for me in the living room. James sat in Richard's favorite armchair legs, crossed perfectly composed. Amanda perched on the edge of the sofa, hands folded in her lap, eyes on the floor. Between them, the coffee table was covered with a neat stack of papers. Elizabeth. James said, his voice warm and concerned. We need to talk. Please sit down. I set my briefcase by the door and moved to the sofa, keeping space between myself and Amanda. She still wouldn't look at me. James leaned forward, his expression earnest. Amanda and I have been talking, and we're worried about you. We want to make sure you're protected legally and medically. So we've prepared some routine paperwork, just standard planning documents that every responsible adult should have. He slid the stack across the table toward me. I picked up the first document, Financial Power of Attorney. I scanned the dense legal text. It granted James Sterling full authority over all my financial affairs, bank accounts, investments, real estate transactions. He could sell my house, close my accounts, transfer assets, all without my consent. The second document was a healthcare power of attorney. It named Amanda as my healthcare decision maker. But buried in paragraph 3 was a clause. In the event that Amanda Whitmore Sterling is unable or unwilling to act, all healthcare authorities shall transfer immediately to Dr. James Sterling. A trap within a trap. James could pressure Amanda to step aside, then control my medical care completely. The third document made my blood run cold, voluntary request for mental health evaluation. It stated that I, Elizabeth Whitmore, was requesting a comprehensive psychiatric assessment due to concerns about my own cognitive decline. The evaluation was scheduled for Monday, March 11th at 10 o'clock in the morning with Dr. Alan Morrison. I set the papers down carefully, my hands steady. 60 years of courtroom training took over. I looked at James, then at Amanda. These documents don't protect me, I said quietly. They strip me of every legal right I have. James's smile didn't waver. That's not true at all. They simply ensure that if something happens to you, if I sign these, I interrupted, you will control my money, my property, and my medical care. You'll have me declared incompetent and institutionalized within a week. The smile finally faded. James straightened in his chair, and for the first time, I saw the man beneath the mask, cold, calculating, dangerous. Elizabeth. He said, his voice flat, now stripped of false warmth. You can sign these tonight, or we can do this the hard way. The hard way? He glanced at his watch. Monday morning at 10, you have an appointment with Dr. Morrison. By Monday afternoon at 2, I'll have an emergency conservatorship order signed by a judge. By Tuesday morning, you'll be in a memory care facility in Colombia. The house will be listed by Wednesday. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. He had planned every step, every timeline, every legal maneuver. Amanda made a small choked sound. "James, please, stay out of this, Amanda," he snapped, not looking at her. She flinched and went silent. James stood adjusting his cuffs. "You have until Sunday night to reconsider. After that, the decision is out of your hands." He walked out of the living room. A moment later, I heard the guest room door close. Amanda rose, her face pale and tear-streaked. "Mom, She stopped, shook her head, and fled upstairs. I sat alone in the darkening room, the unsigned documents spread before me like evidence at a crime scene. 3 days. Monday morning, James would spring his trap. But I had something he didn't know about. Videos, audio recordings, a second will, Thomas Bradford, and Richard's final gift, the truth about Patricia and Karen. Now I would strike back. Saturday morning, I sat at the breakfast table staring at the small orange prescription bottle in my hand. The label read, Elizabeth Whitmore, lisinopril 10 milligrams. Take 1 daily for blood pressure. But something was wrong. For the past week, every evening after taking my medication, I had felt strange, dizzy, disoriented, my thoughts scattered like leaves in the wind. I would forget what I was doing, mid-sentence lose track of conversations, find myself standing in rooms with no memory of why I had gone there. The symptoms James had been describing to my friends, the symptoms he had fabricated in those forged medical records, except they were real. I poured 1 pill into my palm and studied it under the morning light. Then I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a photograph I had taken months ago, my previous prescription bottle, the old pills clearly visible. The color was different. The new pills were a lighter shade of pink, slightly smaller, and when I held one between my fingers, it felt less dense, almost chalky. These were not my blood pressure pills. 20 minutes later, I pulled into the parking lot of a small pharmacy on the outskirts of Mount Pleasant, 15 miles from Charleston. I couldn't risk going to my usual pharmacy. James might be watching, or he might have contacts there. But I knew someone I could trust. Dr. Margaret Foster had been a pharmacist for 35 years and a friend of mine since our daughters went to school together. She owned this quiet suburban shop, and I knew she would help me without questions. The bell above the door chimed as I entered. Margaret looked up from behind the counter, her kind face breaking into a smile that faded the moment she saw my expression. "Elizabeth, what's wrong?" I set the pill bottle on the counter between us. "Margaret, I need you to test these. I think someone has tampered with my medication." Her smile vanished completely. She picked up the bottle, examined the label, then opened it and shook a few pills into her palm. Her face went pale. "Come with me," she said quietly. In the back room, Margaret used a small field testing kit, the kind pharmacies keep to verify suspicious prescriptions. She crushed 1 pill, added reagents, and waited. The solution turned a deep blue, then purple. She looked up at me, her voice shaking. "Elizabeth, this is not blood pressure medication. This is a benzodiazepine, a sedative mixed with a small amount of a hallucinogenic compound." My hands went cold. Margaret continued her words, slow and deliberate. "If you've been taking this every day for a week, you would appear confused, disoriented, forgetful. You would seem mentally impaired, which is exactly what someone would need to prove I'm not mentally competent." I finished. "This is attempted poisoning, Elizabeth. You need to call the police, now." "Not yet," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I need 1 more piece of evidence. Margaret, can you keep these pills as evidence, document everything, the test results, the date, your professional analysis?" She nodded, already reaching for an evidence bag. She sealed the pills inside, wrote the date and time on the label, and signed her name across the seal. "I'll keep these locked in my safe," she said. "And Elizabeth, be careful." I drove home slowly, my mind racing. James had been poisoning me, slowly, methodically making me appear exactly as unstable as his forged medical records claimed. Back in my bedroom, I opened the medicine cabinet and pulled out a bottle of vitamin B12 tablets I had purchased that morning from a grocery store across town. The pills were almost identical in size and color to the poisoned medication. I emptied the fake blood pressure pills into a plastic bag, then refilled the prescription bottle with the vitamins. I placed the bottle back exactly where it had been. Then I carried the bag of poison pills to my safe, where I kept the hidden folder, the second Will Richards letter, and the investigator's report. I locked it all away. Tonight I would see what else James tried, and this time I would turn the game around. If you're still here, comment 11 so I know you're standing with me. And tell me if you discovered someone was secretly drugging you to make you look unstable. What would you do next? Because what happened the next night changed everything. A quick note before we continue: the next part includes dramatized elements for storytelling purposes. If this isn't your kind of content, this is a good place to pause. That evening at 7 o'clock, James cooked a special dinner: ribeye steaks, garlic mashed potatoes, and a bottle of California Cabernet. He had never cooked for us before. I knew immediately something was wrong. We sat at the round dining table, the one Richard and I had chosen 30 years ago. James uncorked the wine with a flourish, smiling warmly at Amanda and me. Amanda shifted in her seat, her voice uncertain. "Maybe tonight we should just drink water." James laughed. "Don't be ridiculous, we're celebrating." "Celebrating what?" I asked. His smile widened. "New beginnings." The words hung in the air like a threat. Monday's evaluation, the conservatorship, the memory care facility. James poured the wine, 3 glasses each, filled halfway with dark red liquid. He set one in front of me, one in front of Amanda, one at his own place. Then he turned away, walking toward the kitchen counter under the pretense of checking the steaks. But I saw everything. In that brief moment when his back was turned, James pulled a small vial from his pocket, clear glass, no larger than my thumb. He uncapped it and let 3 drops fall into my wine glass. The liquid was clear, odorless. It vanished into the red wine without a trace. My heart hammered, but I kept my face perfectly still. James returned to the table, setting down a salt shaker. He smiled at me. "Shall we toast?" I remembered something Richard had taught me years ago. He had loved card tricks, and he'd spent countless evenings showing me sleight of hand, the art of misdirection, of making people see what you wanted them to see while your hands did something else entirely. James reached for a napkin, turning slightly toward Amanda to ask her about work. The flower arrangement in the center of the table, a large crystal vase filled with white lilies, blocked Amanda's view of my hands. 3 seconds. That was all I had. I reached forward as if adjusting my napkin. My right hand brushed my wine glass, sliding it 6 inches to the left. My left hand moved simultaneously, sliding James's glass 6 inches to the right. The tablecloth muffled any sound. The glasses were identical crystal stems, the wine the exact same color and level. When James turned back, he didn't notice. The glass in front of him looked exactly like his own. He lifted it, the poisoned glass, and raised it high. "To family," he said. We touched glasses. The crystal rang softly. Amanda sipped nervously. I brought the glass to my lips but didn't swallow. James drank deeply, a long, satisfied gulp. Dinner began. We ate in tense silence. I cut my steak into small pieces, counting the minutes. 5 minutes. James was animated, talking about a surgery he had scheduled. 10 minutes. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for his fork. 15 minutes. Sweat appeared on his forehead. His pupils looked strange, too wide, unfocused. 20 minutes. He slurred a word, then another. Amanda looked at him, alarm flashing across her face. "James, are you all right?" He tried to stand, gripping the edge of the table. His knees buckled. He staggered sideways, knocking his chair over, and collapsed onto the hardwood floor. Amanda screamed. She dropped to her knees beside him, shaking his shoulder. "James, James, wake up!" I stood calmly and walked to the phone on the wall. I dialed 911. "My son-in-law has just collapsed," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I believe he may have ingested something dangerous. Please send an ambulance immediately." I gave the address. Then I added, "And please send the police. I have evidence this was not an accident." I hung up and looked down at James's unconscious body, his face pale and slick with sweat, his chest rising and falling in shallow gasps. The game was over. 3 hours later, I sat in the emergency waiting room at Charleston Memorial Hospital. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. My briefcase rested beside me, heavy with evidence. Across the room, Amanda sat alone, trembling her face in her hands. At 10 o'clock, a doctor in blue scrubs emerged. Mrs. Whitmore, your son-in-law is stable. Toxicology confirms he ingested a high dose of benzodiazepines combined with a hallucinogenic compound. Do you know why? I met his gaze. I do, and I believe he intended it for me. He nodded slowly. The police are on their way. 10 minutes later, a woman in a dark blazer entered. A detective's badge gleamed at her belt. She was in her early 40s with sharp eyes and dark hair in a neat bun. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm Detective Sarah Mitchell, Charleston, PD. I stood and shook her hand. Detective? She sat beside me. I've been investigating your son-in-law for 6 months. I stared. 6 months. Karen Sterling's younger sister filed a complaint after Karen's death in 2019. She believed James was responsible. We've been building a case, but we needed concrete evidence. She glanced at my briefcase. It appears you've provided that. I opened the case. First, a USB drive. Video footage from 4 hidden cameras. James planning a fraudulent evaluation for Monday, discussing an emergency conservatorship, coercing my daughter. She took it nodding. Next, a sealed evidence bag. Pills from my prescription bottle tested by Dr. Margaret Foster. They're benzodiazepines mixed with hallucinogens, not blood pressure medication. James had been poisoning me for a week to fake mental impairment. Sarah's jaw tightened. I handed her a legal document. My late husband's second will executed 6 months before his death. It revokes any powers of attorney signed under duress and names our attorney Thomas Bradford as emergency executor. Richard suspected James was dangerous. Then Richard's letter and the investigator's report. My husband hired a private investigator. This details James's previous marriages. Patricia Sterling died in 2014 in a suspicious fall. James inherited $800,000. Karen Sterling was declared incompetent in 2018 with James as guardian. She took her own life in a psychiatric hospital in 2019. He controlled her $600,000 estate. Both women were older and wealthy. Sarah's expression darkened as she read through the pages. Finally, the hidden folder. Forged medical records, fabricated psychological evaluation conservatorship petition, and email correspondence about selling my house for $2.1 million. I found this under his bed. Sarah reviewed everything carefully. The waiting room was silent except for the distant hum of monitors. After several minutes, she looked up. This is more than enough for elder abuse, financial exploitation, fraud, attempted murder, and criminal conspiracy. She studied me. You've built a prosecutor's dream case. I was a prosecutor for 30 years, Detective. I know what constitutes evidence. A faint smile crossed her face. That explains everything. She stood and turned toward Amanda, still sitting across the room, her shoulders shaking. Ms. Whitmore Sterling, I need to speak with you privately. Amanda's head jerked up. Tears streamed down her face. Mom, she whispered, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I kept my voice soft. I know, sweetheart. Just tell the truth. Amanda nodded and followed Sarah down the hall toward a private interview room. I watched them go. The truth would come out now, all of it. I sat in the observation room at the Charleston Police Department watching through the one-way mirror. It was nearly midnight. The fluorescent lights in the interrogation room cast harsh shadows across the metal table, where Amanda sat across from Detective Mitchell. A recording device blinked red between them. Sarah's voice came through the speaker mounted on the wall beside me. Amanda, I need you to tell me everything from the beginning. Amanda's hands were folded on the table, trembling. When she spoke, her voice was so quiet I had to lean closer to the speaker to hear. James has gambling debts, $300,000. He's owed money since 2022 underground poker games, sports betting. The people he borrowed from were threatening him. Sarah made notes. Go on. Last year, he told me he had a plan to get the money. He wanted to take my mother's house and assets. Amanda's voice cracked. I said no. I told him it was insane that I would never do that to her. He got angry. He said if I didn't help him, he'd destroy my medical career, he'd report me for prescription fraud, something I never did. He said he'd ruin my reputation at the hospital, make sure I could never practice again. I pressed my hand against the glass. That's when the abuse started. Amanda continued. He isolated me from my friends. He took control of all our bank accounts. He monitored my phone, my email, everything. I felt like I was suffocating. When did it become physical? Sarah asked gently. 6 months ago. I refused again, and he hit me for the first time. Amanda wiped her eyes. Then he apologized. He cried. He said he'd never do it again, that he was just stressed about the money. I believed him. Sarah slid a tissue across the table. Amanda took it. He made me take pictures of my mother's secret photographs to make her look confused or disoriented. He made me draft a conservatorship petition. I wrote it, but I never filed it. I kept hoping he'd give up, that he'd find another way. But he didn't. No, last week he filed the petition himself without telling me. I didn't even know until my mother found the folder under our bed. Amanda's shoulders shook. That's when I realized he'd been planning this for months, and I was just a tool he was using. Do you have evidence of what James did to you? Sarah asked. Amanda nodded and pulled her phone from her pocket. Text messages where he threatens me. Photos of bruises I dated and time-stamped them. Voice recordings of him telling me what to do, how to lie, what to say. Financial records showing he locked me out of our accounts 3 months ago. She slid the phone across the table. Sarah examined it carefully. Amanda, you're a victim too, Sarah said quietly. But you participated in a conspiracy to commit elder abuse and fraud. You'll need to testify against James in court. If you're willing to cooperate fully and tell the truth, the district attorney is prepared to offer you an immunity agreement. No jail time, but you'll be required to undergo mandatory therapy. Amanda looked up, hope flickering in her red, swollen eyes. I'll do it. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Sarah pulled out a legal document and set it in front of her. Amanda read it quickly, then signed her name at the bottom. 10 minutes later, the door to the interrogation room opened. Amanda stepped into the hallway where I was waiting. She stopped when she saw me. Mom, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry. I was so scared. I didn't know how to get out. I stepped forward and pulled her into my arms. She collapsed against me, sobbing. We'll get through this, I said softly, stroking her hair. Together. 10 days later, I walked into courtroom 4B of the Charleston County Courthouse. It was Tuesday, March 19th, 9 o'clock in the morning. I wore a navy suit, my silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, shoulders straight. I had spent 30 years in courtrooms like this. Today, I was the witness. The courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the back rows. Friends sat in the gallery. Helen, Margaret Foster, Thomas Bradford. Amanda sat in the front row, hands folded tightly, face pale. At the defense table, James sat in a gray suit, face calm, eyes cold. He did not look at me. All rise. Judge Harold Brennan entered. We sat. Assistant District Attorney Rebecca Lawson stood mid-40s, sharp professional. She addressed the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. James Sterling is charged with elder abuse and exploitation fraud and falsification, attempted murder, and criminal conspiracy. The evidence will show he is a calculating predator who targeted Elizabeth Whitmore to steal her home assets and freedom. This was not the first time. She called Detective Sarah Mitchell. Sarah testified about the investigation, the hidden folder forged medical records conservatorship petition. She presented the investigator's report on James's previous marriages. Patricia Sterling dead in a suspicious fall in 2014. Karen Sterling declared incompetent in 2018, dead by her own hand in 2019. Both older, wealthy, vulnerable. The jury's faces were grim. Dr. Margaret Foster testified next. She explained testing my pills, lab analysis benzodiazepines mixed with hallucinogens, not blood pressure medication. If Mrs. Whitmore had continued taking these, she would appear confused, disoriented, forgetful, exactly like early-stage dementia. The jury took notes. Thomas Bradford testified about Richard's second will, the letter warning about James and the investigator's findings. The jury listened intently. Then Rebecca played the videos. The courtroom fell silent. James's voice filled the room, cold, calculating, discussing the Monday evaluation, the conservatorship hearing the timeline for institutionalizing me and selling my house within 30 days. The jury watched, transfixed. People whispered. Finally, Amanda took the stand. She told everything. The $300,000 gambling debts, the threats to destroy her career, the isolation abuse coercion. She presented text messages, photos of bruises, voice recordings. When James's attorney cross-examined her, he had nothing. The evidence was overwhelming. At 4 o'clock, Rebecca stood. The state calls Elizabeth Whitmore. I walked to the witness stand. The bailiff held out a Bible. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. I sat and looked across the courtroom. My eyes found James. He stared back expressionless. Rebecca approached. Mrs. Whitmore, please tell the court what happened. I took a breath. My voice was calm and clear. Your Honor, I stand here not only as a victim, but as a former prosecutor who spent 30 years fighting for justice. I understand the law. I know my rights. And I know that James Sterling is a predator who has made a career out of targeting vulnerable women, stealing their autonomy, their homes, and in some cases, their lives. I continued my testimony the next morning, Wednesday, March 20th. I told the jury everything. How I had found the hidden folder under the guest room bed, filled with photographs and forged medical records. How I had overheard James and Amanda discussing the conservatorship plan late at night. How I had felt isolated and manipulated as my friends began to pull away believing James's lies about my mental state. How I had installed hidden cameras and gathered evidence. How I had discovered the poison pills and had them tested. How I had switched the wine glasses at dinner, turning James's own weapon back on him. The jury listened to every word. When I finished James's defense, attorney stood for cross-examination. He was a thin man in his 50s, and his questions were predictable. Mrs. Whitmore, isn't it possible you simply misunderstood my client's intentions? I turned away from him and looked directly at the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, I did not misunderstand. I have video evidence showing my son-in-law planning my institutionalization. I have physical evidence of poisoned medication. I have testimony from multiple witnesses, and I have a documented pattern of predatory behavior spanning over a decade and 2 previous victims. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a calculated, systematic attempt to destroy my life. The courtroom was silent. The defense attorney had no follow-up questions. Rebecca Lawson gave her closing argument that afternoon. She was brief and direct. The evidence in this case is overwhelming. James Sterling targeted a vulnerable widow, forged medical documents, poisoned her medication, coerced her daughter, and attempted to steal her home and her freedom. The law is clear. The facts are clear. James Sterling is guilty beyond any reasonable doubt. The defense's closing argument was weak and unconvincing. There was nothing he could say that would erase the videos, the lab reports, or the testimony. The jury deliberated for 2 hours and 40 minutes. When they returned, the 4-person stood. On the count of elder abuse and exploitation, how do you find guilty? On the count of fraud and falsification of documents, guilty. On the count of attempted murder, guilty. On the count of criminal conspiracy, guilty. James sat perfectly still, his face blank. Judge Brennan scheduled sentencing for the following morning. On Thursday, March 21st, James Sterling was sentenced to 15 to 20 years in state prison. He was ordered to pay $50,000 in restitution to me. A permanent restraining order was issued. He would undergo mandatory psychological evaluation. Amanda received 2 years of probation, weekly mandatory therapy, and a 6-month suspension of her medical license. A 1-year no-contact order was issued between her and me, giving us both time to heal before attempting reconciliation. James was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. He did not look back. 6 weeks later, I sold the Victorian house on Trad Street. I bought a small cottage on the waterfront with a garden and a view of Charleston Harbor. The house was bright and warm with large windows that let in the morning sun. I joined the South Carolina Elder Abuse Prevention Network. I spoke at community centers and senior living facilities. I told my story so that others might recognize the warning signs and protect themselves. One afternoon, I received a letter from Amanda. It was 5 pages long, filled with apologies and grief and hope. She was in therapy. She was working to rebuild her life. She wanted someday to rebuild our relationship. I wrote back, healing takes time, but I'm willing to try. On a Sunday morning in early May, I stood on my porch with a cup of coffee in my hands. Sailboats drifted across the harbor, their white sails bright against the blue water. The sunrise painted the sky in shades of gold and pink. I had spent 2 years grieving my husband. I had nearly lost myself to the cruelty of a man who saw me as nothing more than a stepping stone to wealth. But in the end, I found what I thought I had lost forever: my voice, my power, and my will to fight. I am 62 years old. I am a widow. I am a mother. I am a survivor. And I will never ever let anyone take that from me again. Looking back on everything that happened, I realize how close I came to losing not just my home, but my identity. If there's one thing I want you to take from my story, it's this: don't be like me in one crucial way. Don't wait until you're at the edge of disaster to trust your instincts. I ignored the warning signs because I didn't want to believe my own daughter could betray me. That hesitation nearly cost me everything. These kinds of family drama stories aren't just entertainment, they're warnings. Elder abuse is real, it's common, and it often comes from those closest to us. My story is one of many grandma stories where vulnerability is mistaken for weakness, where age is seen as an opportunity rather than something to respect. The lesson I learned: your voice matters at any age. God gave us intuition for a reason. When something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't let anyone, family, friends, or strangers silence that inner voice. I am 62 years old and I refuse to be invisible. These family drama stories teach us that survival isn't just about physical safety. It's about protecting your autonomy, your dignity, and your right to make your own choices. To anyone facing similar grandma stories of manipulation or abuse, you are not alone. You are not powerless, and you are not too old to fight back. Document everything, trust your gut, and remember that asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Family drama stories and grandma stories like mine end in two ways: with the victim silenced or with the survivor speaking up. I chose to speak. And with God's grace, I found my strength when I needed it most. Thank you for walking this journey with me to the very end. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What would you do if you found yourself in my situation, facing betrayal from someone you trusted? Your perspective means everything to me. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing so you won't miss my future stories. A gentle note: while inspired by real-world issues surrounding elder abuse and family betrayal, certain elements have been dramatized for storytelling purposes. If this content isn't your preference, feel free to explore my other videos that might suit you better.